Hi, in this tutorial we're going to look at the basics of programming. I'm assuming first of all that you don't have a programming background, so otherwise you wouldn't be watching these tutorials. So the language that we're going to be learning is Java, and the IDE that we're going to be using is called Eclipse. And you can see this is what Eclipse would look like to begin with. And by IDE we mean something that we can edit our source code or the characters that we type in, and then we can also run within this environment. So to begin with, if you pulled up Eclipse and you were to install it and start it, you would see something that looks kind of like this. It's saying, where do you want to put all of your source code and resource files? And by default, it's going to give you users and then whatever your username is. But I'm going to change that right now. And what I'll do is I'll say I want to dump all of the code onto the desktop, and I'm going to make a new folder. And you can call it whatever you want. I'll call it My Projects and say OK. And then finish out by clicking the OK button. And it'll be building a lot of infrastructure for us. And it'll start with this page here, but we can get rid of that. We don't necessarily need that. And I'll go full screen here. And on the left is an organizational window that we have. So this is going to have a hierarchy of folders and files within those folders. Here is the source editor. That's where we're going to be typing in all of our code. Here on the right-hand side, you can see is an outline, and we're really not going to be using that. And then down here at the bottom, this is going to be changing depending on what it is that we're actually doing. So the first thing that I need to do is to create a new project. So I'll go to File, New Java Project. And again, I can call this whatever I want. So I'll call this, let's say, Project 1. That sounds good enough. Also notice that if you have a specific version of Java that you want to use, you could change that right here. Currently it's at 1.8, and so we'll just leave it at that. That's fairly current. Now I could click Finish here, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go to the Next button here, and the reason is because you can see there are additional settings. Now for when we first start, we're really not going to have to change anything. But later on, when you get into Android programming, something like that, you might look into Projects tab or the Library tab, something like that, to be able to add additional jars if you need to do something like that, or change the order that things are built. So I'll click Finish and be done with that. Now notice that we really don't have anything here in our project right now, so I'm going to right-click on it and go to New, and then I'll go to New Class. So we can call this anything we want. I like using the word driver, and this is going to be kind of the main starting class that we're going to be working with. You shouldn't know that term class, but that's okay. So I'll just say finish. There's a lot of options here, but I'm just going to finish out. At this point, we actually have some code that does compile. It doesn't do anything. It actually doesn't run because it's missing some really important pieces of code. But notice that it says public class driver, and that's because we typed in the name driver. So to prove that this is valid code, I could click here on this Run button, and when I do that, it says, hey, the selection can't be launched because there's not a main. Now the main is going to be where the entry point of the program is, and so it's going to be a little bit strange, but I'll come inside and type public static void main string args with some brackets here. I'll put a curly brace there, an opening curly, and a closing curly automatically populates right there. Now a couple of interesting things about this. First of all, notice that string is capitalized. If you put a lowercase string, it won't compile. It won't recognize what that is. And then also notice that a lot of these words turn a different color, and the reason is because those are reserved by the language of Java. So probably the first thing that we'll want to do is to be able to print something to the screen. And again, all of the code that you see right here shouldn't make any sense. Don't worry about that. But personally, I would recommend that you just go ahead and memorize this because it's the minimal amount of code that you'll need for any Java program. In other words, for every project that you create, you're going to have to type in public static void main string args. It has to look pretty much exactly like that. Okay, so to be able to print something to the screen, it would be nice if we could just say print, but of course that's not that easy. So we have to type in system.out.println, and notice that it's just ln. And then whatever it is that we want to print here inside of some quotation marks. So in this case, we'll just print out some text, and we'll make it really simple, and we'll say hello world, because that's the most famous program that's out there. Okay. Also notice a couple of different things. First of all, system, it's capital S right there. And then also notice here at the end of individual single statements, in other words, here at the end of line 4, we put a semicolon. And when you first get into programming, people get a little bit confused about why we need a semicolon. It's the same thing as a period at the end of the sentence. It's essentially that we've completed a thought or a command to the computer. Okay, so believe it or not, this actually works. And so I can come up here to run it. And it says, do we want to save everything? That's fine. So we'll save it. And then down here at the bottom, first of all, you can see that it terminated, and that also it printed out to the screen, hello world. Okay, now there's two different versions of printing here. We can use system.out.print, or we can use system.out.println. Students, when they first get into it, are a little bit confused about what the difference is. And let me show you real quick. So to do the same thing, to print out hello world, I could also do it like this. I could say, instead of println, I could say print just hello with a comma, and that would print out just hello. And then after that, I could say system.out.println world. Let's put a space to make it look exactly the same. And so what's going to happen here is when I have a println, it actually drops down to the next line to be able to print before it starts printing the next line, let's say. So what's going to happen is it'll print out literally hello, comma, with a space, but it won't drop down to the next line. And then it'll print out world on the same line as hello. So if I were to run this again and save it, you can see that we have two pieces of text that look exactly the same, even though we use two different ways of printing. Okay, so that is essentially how you're going to output, and we can concatenate things. For example, if I wanted to add two strings together, I could say whatever I wanted to, Bob, and if I were to run it again, you could see that we're going to get Bob tacked on the end of this. So this is pretty convenient that we can add things together inside of a print statement. Okay, so you may be tempted to say, well, how do we do input? How do we read information from the user? And it does involve this system.in. So in other words, if there's a system.out, there should be a system.in. Well, we really don't use this in this fashion. We don't say system.in. Instead, we have to create something called a scanner. And what I would recommend is that we're going to create a separate scanner for reading in numbers and then another scanner for reading in strings. And there's a reason. I can't go into the technical details of it, but it really doesn't matter. So if we were going to do that, I could create a scanner, call it, let's say number scanner. It gets a new scanner, passing it system.in. Now again, there is a lot of places that you could make mistakes here, and I'm not expecting that you understand anything about this line right here. What's important though is that we've created something called number scanner that we're going to use to be able to read information from the user. So first of all, it says, hey, there's an error here. All these little jaggy lines underneath scanner says that it doesn't know what that is or what we should do about it, but it says that there are 7 quick fixes available. The first one is to import scanner. Well, that sounds great, so I'm just going to click on it, and notice what happens up at line 1 when I do that. How it puts the import Java util scanner, so it solved that problem, and the little red squiggly lines go away. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is maybe ask the user how old they are, or how many teeth they have. It doesn't really matter. And so I need a place to store that information. So typically we would store that in some kind of integer or some kind of floating point number or something like that. So let's look at how to declare a variable in Java. To do that, I'll say int age, and I could put a semicolon here. And what this says here on line 12 is that we're going to create a chunk of memory named age, and it can hold integers. So it's a two-part kind of thing. You've got your data type that you want to store, you have a variable name next, and then you follow that by a semicolon. Now typically it's good practice to go ahead and give it some kind of initial value. So let's say it's going to start out at the value 0. So this is the assignment operator right here, and what we're doing is we're taking the value 0 and we're putting it into this variable here called age. In other words, we've initialized that small chunk of memory to the value 0. Okay, so next let's go ahead and prompt the user and say, how old are you? So I'll say system.out.println, or actually let's use print here, that might be a good use of it. Or enter your age, that might be good. And I'll put a semicolon here. And again, notice that each of these individual statements has a semicolon at the end of it. Now the next thing that we need to do is to read what it is that the user types in and put it into our variable age. I'll say age gets now assigned number scanner dot next int. Now notice that it pulls up this little pop-up box here that shows all the different things that we could do with our number scanner. At this point I could technically hit tab, and when I do that it's going to finish it out. It's going to say, oh, you're talking about next int. So if I were to tab it over there, or double click on it, sorry, it'll automatically fill that in, and then I'll put a semicolon at the end. Now let's look at what's going to happen here. Starting at line 12, it's going to declare this variable. It's going to open up a chunk of memory. We're going to print out to the screen, enter your age. We're going to prompt the user for their age. At this point, the program is going to pause because we say numberscanner.nextInt. The program will actually pause here, waiting for the user to type something in, which we're assuming is going to be a number. And let's say that it's the number 30, something along those lines. Then we'll put that here into age. So if we were to print out age to the screen, the number 30 would pop up to the screen. So let's see what that would look like. System.out.println, and let's put UR and then age, and we're using our little concatenation operator here, the plus symbol, space, years old. Now this might look a little bit strange, but look at what's going on. Age has some value that the user typed in. So system.out.println UR, so the text UR is going to pop to the screen. Then age, whatever the age value is, not literally the word age, but it would be a number, and then years old. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Save our code. It says hello world Bob, and that comes from lines 6 through 8. We create our number scanner here, and it says enter your age. So what age are we? Let's say that we're 18, and I hit return. It says you are 18 years old. So I think you can see it's pretty straightforward to be able to read in numbers. We could also read in strings. In fact, maybe we'll go ahead and do that. We'll prompt them for their name. And to do this, just like we created our number scanner here in line 10, I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to create a scanner specifically for working with text, for working with strings. And the reason is because working with text and working with strings with just one scanner, it doesn't really work out so well. So at most, you're probably only going to need 2 scanners for all of the input that you're going to do with the user. So let's create another scanner. I'll say scanner string scanner. It's a new scanner. And again, we'll pass it system.in. And if you don't understand this, it's totally okay. Just know that string scanner is what we're going to work with. So let's prompt the user for their name. I can say system.out.println, or let's use print again. Enter your name. And notice the semicolon. And then after that, let's create a string. In fact, let's do it all in one line. I can say string, capital S, string name gets string scanner dot next line. Okay, so I hit enter there and put my semicolon. So at this point, we've now read in the user's age, and we've also read in the user's name. So let's greet them. You could say system.out.println hello, and then plus their name, followed by a semicolon. So let's go ahead and run this code. And when I do this, you'll see enter your age. Let's type in 19 this time. It says you are 19 years old, and what is your name? My name is Jeff, and so it says hello Jeff. So hopefully you understand a little bit more about how to do input and output. Printing things is pretty straightforward. You'll get used to this system.out.println. And then doing input is a little bit cumbersome. You can see here on lines 10 and 17 we had to do this kind of strange scanner thing. This will make sense a little bit later on in the class when we start talking about classes. One last thing that I wanted to talk about is comments. And so a comment is how we leave ourselves a note in our program. And to do that is relatively straightforward. We can use a single line comment, which is a // and notice that it turns green. And I can say this is a comment. And again, it's a single line comment. So if I were to drop down and try to continue this comment, you can see it's going to start complaining about the code that's there and say, hey, I don't understand what you're doing here. Okay. If we wanted something that was a little bit more extensive, let's say paragraphs of information, or maybe some information that we need to leave for the next programmer on the job, we might want to use something that looks like this. I can put in /star, and notice that everything turns green at this point. And then if I hit return, it's going to automatically fill this in, but it's a pair. So I have a /star, and again, it's a /, and then down here at the bottom, I have a */. The reason this is important is because now all of these lines of code right here are actually just going to be text. So I could say this program was written by me, and then I can drop down to the next line right here. Yes, Jeff Chastain, etc., etc., etc. All of these lines here between 3 and 6 is going to be interpreted as comments. Okay. Now you may ask yourself, why am I actually going to leave any comments here? And trust me, if you go back and you look at your code 3 to 6 months from now, after you're done with it, you're really not going to recognize what it is that you did. Okay. One last thing in terms of declaring variables. Notice that I commented here about the name age. I could have said int x or int y or some typical variable name that you would see, but notice that it's age instead. The reason that this is a good idea is because a little bit later on, chances are, because I called it age, I'm trying to read in the age or use it as an age of the user or some other variable that's related to age. And the same thing down here. Notice that I called it string name. I didn't call it string x or string some kind of cryptic variable name. Don't think that giving small variable names makes your code any more efficient. It really doesn't. So that's it for now. Hopefully you've learned how to do comments, how to do input, and also how to print things to the screen.